One morning, Keanu Reeves opened his gate and found a baby staring up at him, holding a note with his name. The message warned, "They'll come for her, only you can keep her safe." Who left this child, and why does she have a birthmark shaped like a film camera? What Keanu does next changes everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was just past 5 in the morning when Hector Alvarez, Keanu Reeves' longtime security guard, heard the cry. At first, he thought it might have been a coyote echoing through the canyon, but no. This was softer, sharper, fragile in a way no animal could imitate. A baby. He set down his mug of coffee without finishing it, his body already moving toward the sound as instinct took over. Keanu's remote cabin in the mountains outside Big Sur had always been quiet, private, almost sacred. No one came up here unless they were invited. Hector grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the stone porch, eyes scanning the mist-shrouded trail leading to the gated entrance. The dawn was barely a whisper in the sky. Trees swayed gently in the wind, but the sound came again. That unmistakable, pleading cry. Closer this time. He followed the gravel path leading to the front gate. A towering piece of black iron tucked between boulders and brush. And there, just inside the beam of his flashlight, sat something no man could ever be prepared for. A wicker basket. Inside, a baby girl, wrapped in a lavender blanket, her tiny fists trembling in the chill. Her cries were weak but urgent, and taped carefully to the handle was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, written in a soft but deliberate hand. For Keanu Reeves, urgent, private. Hector's heart pounded. He crouched slowly, speaking in the same voice he'd once used with his own granddaughter. "Hey, little one. It's okay now." He reached for his phone but hesitated. Something about the moment felt electric. Holy, even. Like the air itself was holding its breath. Instead of calling, he lifted the basket gently and turned back toward the cabin. Inside, Keanu was just waking up. The creak of the front door stirred him. Flannel pajama pants, bare feet, a loose black t-shirt. His hair was tousled, face still softened by sleep. When he opened the door and saw Hector standing there with a baby in his arms, he froze. Then Hector said the only words that would make sense in that moment. "He's not crying anymore." Keanu stepped outside, blinking in disbelief. "Someone left her at the gate," Hector said quietly. "With a letter. For you." The baby's eyes were wide now, staring up at the sky as if the stars themselves had escorted her here. And then something even stranger. As Keanu reached out and took her gently into his arms, she stopped crying entirely. Not a whimper, not a breath, just silence and the baby's tiny hand curling instinctively around his thumb. Keanu stood barefoot in the cold, unmoving, the baby pressed against his chest. The sudden stillness in the air felt unnatural, like the earth itself had paused to witness this moment. Hector gently held up the envelope. This was taped to the basket handle. Keanu blinked. His voice was hushed. "You're sure it was for me? It's got your name. In perfect handwriting. Looks like it's been written with care, not rushed. It's clean, dry, which means someone left her not long before I found her." Keanu looked down at the baby. She was warm, impossibly small. Her blanket smelled faintly of lavender and something older, like pages of a book kept safe for years. Her dark eyelashes trembled as she looked at him, not with confusion, but with an uncanny calm. "I've never seen a baby do that," Hector murmured. "She cried until you picked her up. Then? Nothing. It's like she recognized you." Keanu didn't speak. He gently rubbed the baby's back with the side of his thumb, still stunned by how completely she had relaxed in his arms. Her tiny fingers clung to the fabric of his shirt like she belonged there. He nodded toward the living room. "Come inside." They stepped into the soft warmth of the stone and cedar cabin. A fire from the night before still glowed faintly in the hearth. The early morning light was barely beginning to trickle through the tall windows that framed the pine-covered ridge beyond. Keanu set the baby down carefully on the thick wool blanket spread across the couch. She didn't fuss. She stared. And then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Hector watched silently as Keanu picked up the envelope and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Keanu opened it slowly. His eyes moved across the words. Once, then again, slower, then a third time. He sat down hard on the edge of the couch, as if the weight of the message had knocked the breath from him. He didn't speak right away. His jaw clenched, and his free hand went to his temple. "What is it?" Hector asked. Keanu swallowed, then said just one word. "Team knows me." Hector took a cautious step forward. "What do you mean, she knows you?" Keanu's hand trembled slightly as he handed over the letter. His eyes were still locked on the baby, who now reached up toward the vaulted ceiling with both hands, cooing softly, like she was greeting some unseen presence. Hector read the letter in silence. It was handwritten, not typed. The ink was slightly faded, but the strokes were steady. It read, "To Keanu Reeves. If you're reading this, then I was right to trust you. Her name is Isabel. She's yours, even if you don't remember how. You don't know me, but I've followed your story for years. Not the one in headlines, the real one, in quiet interviews, in the way you listen when others speak. Isabel needs someone who won't turn her into a symbol, a spectacle, or an experiment. She needs someone who knows how to live in the shadows but still radiates light. She is more than you can imagine, but she's still just a child. Protect her. You'll know the truth when you look into her eyes. Please, don't let them find her." Hector finished reading. The silence pressed in like snow. Keanu didn't speak. He reached down and let Isabel's small hand curl around his index finger. Her grip was delicate, but unshakably certain. She looked up at him again, and he finally understood what the letter meant. She wasn't afraid of him. She had been waiting for him. There was no way to explain that kind of recognition in a newborn's gaze, but he felt it in his bones. It wasn't logical. It wasn't scientific. It was something older than both. "I don't have children," Keanu said softly. "Not that I know of. Not that I've ever—" He trailed off. "But something in me knows her. It feels familiar." He nodded. "Like I lost her once. And somehow, this is the second chance I never expected." The baby's hand patted his chest. Hector's voice dropped. "Do we call the police?" Keanu looked at him, eyes sharper now. "Not yet." "Keanu, no. Not until I know what's going on. Not until I know who wrote that letter, and why they sound like they've been watching us both." He stood slowly, holding Isabel close. His expression was quiet, but resolute. Whatever had started on that cold mountain morning, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was something deeper, a bond, a warning, a beginning. Outside, the sun finally crested the ridge, spilling golden light across the porch where the basket had been found. Inside, Keanu Reeves stood in the center of his living room with a sleeping baby in his arms, and a truth on the edge of unfolding. The fire was still glowing faintly in the stone hearth as Keanu stepped into the living room, Aria bundled gently in his arms. Her head rested against his chest, tiny fingers curled into his flannel shirt. Outside, dawn was still pushing back the last of the night, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Hector stood by the door, tense, watching every movement with quiet vigilance. Keanu moved slowly toward the couch. He sat down, careful not to jostle the baby. The envelope, white, creased and sealed, remained taped to the handle of the basket. He had taken it inside without opening it, overwhelmed by the surreal weight of it all. Now, he peeled the envelope free. The handwriting across the front was shaky but deliberate. For Keanu Reeves. Urgent. Private. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn at the edges, as if ripped from a notebook in a hurry. The handwriting inside matched the envelope. Unsteady, almost trembling. Her name is Aria. She is not safe. You are the only one I trust. Look at her birthmark, you'll understand. He'll come for her. But she's meant for more than experiments. Please, protect her? Keanu's hand tightened slightly round the note. His jaw tensed. He looked down at Aria, who was sleeping now, her breath soft and even, her small chest rising and falling under the lavender blanket. Her birthmark, he whispered to himself. Very gently, Keanu shifted her in his arms. He found her left sleeve and carefully rolled it up. His breath caught. There, just below her shoulder, was a small birthmark, distinct and unusual. It wasn't a smudge or a vague shape. It was sharp, clear, and unmistakable. It looked exactly like a film camera. Old-fashioned, with a reel, a camera from his early days on set. Keanu stared at it for a long time. His heart pounded, but his body was still. The image seemed to burn into his memory. It was too precise, too personal. Someone knew his life intimately, and they had left this child, this Aria, at his doorstep. Hector stepped closer. Sir, should I call the police now? Or wait? Keanu didn't answer at first. He kept his eyes on the mark, still visible on Aria's small shoulder. The baby stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Finally, Keanu looked up. Call them, he said quietly. But let me hold her until they get here. Hector nodded and stepped outside to make the call. Keanu leaned back, holding Aria close again, the note resting in his lap. A dozen questions rattled in his head. Who wrote it? Why him? Why now? And why did it feel like this baby already belonged to him? 15 minutes later, red and blue lights rolled slowly across the tall trees outside. The crunch of tires over gravel echoed up the hill as two vehicles arrived. One marked Sheriff's Unit and one from Child Services. Keanu stayed seated on the couch, Aria still tucked into the crook of his arm, warm and impossibly calm. She hadn't made a sound since he picked her up. A gentle knock at the door. Hector opened it slowly. Sheriff Miles Harlan stepped in first, tall and solid, with kind eyes and a voice always 2 decibels softer than expected. Behind him, a woman in a gray coat carrying a large leather case entered quietly. She introduced herself as Rachel Mendez from Child Protective Services. Keanu stood as they entered, his expression unreadable, the letter folded and held tightly in his free hand. Rachel gave a soft smile. Mr. Reeves, thank you for calling. We understand a baby was left at your property this morning? Keanu nodded, then carefully turned Aria toward her, letting them see the child but not handing her over. This is her. Her name is Aria. Sheriff Harlan gave a low whistle as he glanced at the basket still near the door. Unbelievable, he muttered. Out here, in the middle of nowhere? Rachel pulled out a form and a small tablet. Do you mind if I see her birth certificate, or anything she might have come with? Keanu opened the folded note and handed it to her. There's no birth certificate, just this. And he gently rolled up Aria's sleeve again and showed them the birthmark. Rachel blinked. Sheriff Harlan leaned in for a better look. You ever seen something like that? Keanu asked quietly. Rachel hesitated. Birthmarks come in all shapes, but this one, she frowned. It's deliberate, too exact. Sheriff Harlan rubbed his chin. That looks like one of those old cameras, like from movie sets. Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. Rachel looked up, her tone careful now. Mr. Reeves, I know this is difficult, but protocol says we must take her into temporary protective custody until we can trace her origins. Keanu's arms instinctively tightened just a little. "She stopped crying the moment I held her," he said softly. "She hasn't made a sound since, like she already knew me." Rachel's voice stayed gentle. "Babies are resilient. They bond quickly, but we don't know where she came from, or who might be looking for her." Sheriff Harlan added, "This could get complicated fast." Keanu looked down at Aria. Her tiny hand had gripped the drawstring on his shirt. "I'm not saying no," he said slowly, "but what if the person who wrote this letter was right? What if someone is coming for her?" Rachel's expression changed, more serious now. "If that's true, then the safest place for her may already be here." The room fell into a silence, both professional and personal, as Rachel slowly lowered her clipboard. She was trained to be clinical, objective, but there was something about the way Keanu held Aria that made her hesitate. Not because it violated protocol, but because it somehow felt right. Keanu looked down at the baby again. Her eyes were still open, watching him. Not in the fuzzy, unfocused way most infants looked at faces, but with eerie awareness, like she was trying to memorize him. "She hasn't blinked since I picked her up," he said softly. Rachel spoke gently. "That could be stress or adrenaline. Babies sometimes lock in during overwhelming moments." Keanu gave a nod, but inside, he wasn't convinced. This wasn't a normal baby, and this wasn't a normal situation. Sheriff Harlan stepped toward the fire, warming his hands. "We'll need to scan the surrounding property. Cameras, tire tracks, might be footprints if they came in on foot." "Dayby were careful," Hector said, arms crossed in the corner. "No prints around the gate. Whoever left her didn't want to be found." Rachel approached Keanu carefully. "Mr. Reeves, may I hold her for a moment?" He hesitated, but then slowly extended Aria into her arms. As soon as Rachel touched the child, Aria let out a soft whimper. Not a scream, but her body tensed, eyes widened, and then she turned her head sharply, away from Rachel. Searching. Rachel's face fell. "That's unusual." Keanu instinctively reached to take her back. The moment she returned to his arms, Aria calmed again. Her shoulders relaxed. Her tiny fingers gripped his shirt. Rachel exhaled. "Okay, that's more than coincidence." Keanu glanced at the folded note still resting on the table. "She was left for me, not just with me, for me." The sheriff eyed the birthmark again. "And whoever left that message knew a whole lot more than they should have." Rachel nodded slowly. "I'm going to file a temporary deferment on placement," she said. "Legally, it buys us 72 hours before custody transfer. After that, we'll need a judge's ruling." 72 hours, Keanu repeated, "to figure out who she is, why she was left here, and why they trusted you with her." Keanu looked down at Aria. Her eyes were finally beginning to flutter closed, tiny breaths rising and falling against his chest. He whispered, more to himself than to them, "I don't know who you are, little one, but I think my life just changed." And then he looked up at the others in the room, his voice low, steady, and impossible to argue with. "Is staying, until we find out the truth." The snow hadn't let up since morning, blanketing the forest road leading to Keanu's mountain home. Inside, the fire crackled, but the room was tense. Aria slept in a makeshift crib fashioned from a cushioned drawer. The note still sat on the coffee table, its shaky handwriting burned into Keanu's mind. The child services worker, a composed woman named Tara Myers, stood near the hearth reviewing paperwork with a cautious eye. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "I need to be honest with you. This is highly irregular." Keanu didn't flinch. His voice was low but steady. "I understand, but I'm not handing her off to strangers, not when someone begged me specifically to protect her." Tara studied him. She dealt with plenty of actors before. Many were kind, some were convincing, but few radiated the grounded presence that Keanu did. Even fewer held a baby like it was the only thing that mattered. "You realize this could become complicated?" she asked. "If no guardian comes forward and no leads turn up, she'll become a ward of the state. There's protocol, systems." Keanu nodded. "Then I want to be part of that system, at least until the truth comes out." Tara hesitated. "You're saying you'd foster her? I'll do the paperwork, the home study, background check, whatever's needed." From the other room, Aria stirred and whimpered. Keanu instinctively moved to pick her up. The moment she was in his arms, she settled. Her tiny hand gripped his shirt collar. Her breathing slowed. Tara watched the scene unfold, something shifting in her expression. "Babies know," she murmured. "They can tell who's safe." He glanced down at Aria. "I don't know where she came from, but she found her way here. To me." Tara slowly opened her briefcase and pulled out a temporary emergency foster agreement. "It's not permanent, but it gives you 30 days of legal guardianship while we investigate." Keanu signed without hesitation. By dusk, the social worker had left, and Keanu stood alone in the quiet house, the baby still asleep against his chest. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't showered, but he couldn't put her down. Something about her felt magnetic, familiar. She stirred again in his arms. Big dark eyes blinked up at him, unfocused but searching. He walked her gently through the living room, the fire casting soft shadows on the wall. "I don't know who you are," he whispered, "or why they brought you to me. But I'm here, and I'm not letting you go." The wind howled outside, but inside the room, the world had narrowed to two people. One man with too many unanswered questions, and one baby girl who had stopped crying the moment he'd held her. The night deepened, and the wind had picked up, making the trees moan against the mountainside. Keanu dimmed the lights and sat down on the worn leather couch. Aria nestled in his arms beneath a soft quilt. He'd held her for hours, and still, she hadn't wanted to be put down. Each time he tried to ease her into the cushioned drawer again, her tiny body tensed, and her whimper rose toward panic. But in his arms, she was quiet, warm, steady. He had been a lot of things in life. Actor, son, brother, friend. But this was different. This was fragile and sacred and terrifying. The weight of her head on his chest wasn't heavy, but it grounded him in a way that nothing else ever had. He watched the flicker of the firelight on her soft cheeks. Her fingers twitched in her sleep, like she was reaching for something only she could see. Keanu gently traced the edge of the blanket near her shoulder and paused. The birthmark, that camera shape. It hadn't faded. If anything, it looked sharper now under the soft light. It was still just a mark, not raised or abnormal, but something about it felt too intentional, like it was meant to be read. Who would leave a baby on someone's doorstep with a note filled with warnings? With a birthmark that mimicked a piece of his world? And why him? Keanu thought about the last time he had held someone so small. Not since his sister's first child, years ago. Back then, it had felt temporary, visiting, playing the uncle. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't hypothetical. This baby had no one else, and someone, somewhere, had believed he was her last, safest chance. A soft knock on the door startled him. He stood quickly, keeping Aria close. Through the peephole, he saw Hector, bundled in his winter jacket and holding 2 grocery bags. Keanu cracked the door. "You didn't have to come back." "I did," Hector said quietly. "You probably haven't eaten, and I figured she might need formula or something." Keanu stepped aside. Hector entered silently, placing the bags on the counter. He glanced at Aria in Keanu's arms and gave a small smile. "He likes you." Keanu didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "She calms down when I hold her. I've never seen anything like it." "She knows," Hector replied. "You're the one she was meant to find." That sentence sat in the air between them for a long moment. Keanu turned his gaze back to the firelight. "I think I just agreed to something that's going to change my life." "He already has," Hector said. Aria stirred again, just slightly. Then, in the stillness of that mountain home, Keanu let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'll protect her," he whispered again. "Whatever this is, I'll protect her." The fire had burned down to soft, glowing embers by the time Aria finally drifted into a deeper sleep. Keanu sat, unmoving, one arm under her tiny frame, the other resting gently across her back. He could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. Slow, calm, trusting. He leaned his head back against the couch and stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. His phone, still silenced from earlier, buzzed on the table. A message from the Child Services liaison popped up. "We'll call tomorrow to schedule a welfare check. Thank you again for agreeing to foster. Rest well." Rest well. Keanu let out a dry breath of laughter. That wasn't going to happen. Not tonight, maybe not for a while. His mind was spinning too fast. Not with fear, but with weight. Responsibility. She was just a baby. But already the world had failed her once. Someone had carried her up his long, winding driveway in the freezing dark and left her, on faith. Left her with a note that didn't ask for help. It demanded it, urged protection, warned of danger. Keanu gently adjusted the blanket over her, careful not to wake her. "I don't know who you are," he whispered to her, his voice barely audible over the crackling embers. "But I'm not letting you go." He closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to feel the gravity of that vow settle into his bones. Outside, the wind howled through the pines like a warning, but inside, Keanu held on, because someone had to. Keanu woke with a start to the soft gurgle of a baby's voice, drifting in from the small crib he'd set beside the fireplace. Morning sunlight spilled across the wooden floor of his mountain home, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about film sets or scripts. His mind and heart were occupied by the little girl, now stretching her tiny hands toward the ceiling like she was trying to grasp sunlight. Aria. It had only been 3 days, but something about the rhythm of his life had already shifted. Keanu had learned to warm bottles by feel rather than time, to recognize the soft whimper that meant she was just fussing versus the sharp cry that meant hunger. He'd burned himself twice trying to get the temperature right. He'd changed more diapers than he cared to admit, and yet, the thing that surprised him most wasn't how difficult it was. It was how deeply he wanted to get it right. That morning, he sat on the couch, cradling her in his arms with a bottle pressed gently to her lips. Her eyes, curious, impossibly focused, stared up at him like she was trying to understand every detail of his face. There was something in the way she looked at him, like she had known him before. As she suckled, he whispered, "You're too small to be this wise, aren't you?" When she finished, she reached a tiny hand up and touched his chin. He smiled, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Later, as the sun settled behind the trees, Keanu pulled out his old guitar. He hadn't played it in months, maybe longer, but something about the quiet in the house made him want to fill it. He strummed a few chords softly, not expecting much of a reaction. But Aria turned toward him in her seat. She didn't just look, she listened. Her gaze didn't wander, her body didn't fidget. She stilled, completely, eyes locked on his hands, as if she could feel the music before she understood it. Keanu slowed the chords, letting each note linger. Then he hummed an old melody from a poem he'd once turned into a lullaby. Aria's head tilted. And then, faint, barely audible, she cooed in pitch. It wasn't quite humming, but it wasn't random sound either. She was echoing the notes. He lowered the guitar. "No way," he whispered. She cooed again, this time on a slightly different note, closer to what he had just played. Keanu grabbed his journal that evening, one he hadn't opened in nearly 2 years, and began to write. That night, Keanu sat by the fireplace, the journal resting on his lap, as Aria slept curled against his chest in a soft wrap. His pen moved slowly at first, but then steadily, as he put to paper what he couldn't quite explain aloud. "She watches me like she knows something," he wrote. "Not just like a baby watching a face, but like she recognizes me. Like she's waiting for me to remember something too." He paused, then added, "She hums when I play, and today I swear, she tried to follow the rhythm of my breathing." Like we were syncing up. The warmth of the fire made the shadows dance across the room. He glanced down at her, her tiny mouth half open, her breathing soft. Every time he whispered something about the stars or the sky, she calmed instantly, as though the words gave her a sense of home. He had tested it more than once, mentioning galaxies, constellations, or even the moon, and every time she responded with stillness and a kind of peace that was hard to describe. She didn't do that with anything else, not with toys, not with food, but with the stars. Something lit up inside her. The next morning, Keanu took her outside, bundled in a soft fleece wrap. The mountain air was crisp, but Aria didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes lifted toward the pale sky, as if she were looking for something beyond what could be seen. He whispered, "What are you looking for, little one?" She didn't answer, of course, but the silence that followed felt intentional. That afternoon, Keanu pulled out a few books from a crate in the corner. Poetry collections, mostly. Old, weathered volumes he hadn't touched in years. He began to read aloud as Aria lay in her bassinet. His voice was soft, and the words Yeats, Rilke, Neruda spilled like slow music into the room. To his astonishment, Aria didn't fuss, didn't squirm. She was still. Her eyelids fluttered but never shut completely. She seemed to be listening. And then it happened again. On the second stanza of a poem about celestial flight, she giggled. A light, airy sound, unprompted, joyful, not timed with a funny face or a tickle, just, in response to the line, "He dreamed of stars with wings." Keanu closed the book slowly. He walked to the crib and looked down at her. "You're not an ordinary baby, are you?" Aria smiled in her sleep. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But something had taken root in him, deep and unshakable. He wasn't just caretaking anymore. He was learning her language. One heartbeat at a time. That evening, Keanu stood barefoot in the living room, Aria in his arms, swaying gently to the soft notes of a lullaby played on his vintage record player. The song had no words, just a gentle instrumental hum with a distant echo of a piano, and yet Aria responded like it was the most familiar thing in the world. Her little head rested on his shoulder, and her hand, so small it barely spanned his collarbone, gripped onto his shirt with the quiet strength of someone holding on to their place in the universe. When the melody shifted to a slower rhythm, she let out a hum. Not random babble, not noise, but a quiet, deliberate attempt to echo the music itself. Keanu stopped moving. He didn't say a word, just stood there, stunned by the sound coming from her. The next note on the record fell and Aria hummed again. He exhaled slowly, his arms instinctively holding her closer. "You're hearing the music," he whispered, "and you're trying to speak back." A moment later, her humming stopped, but she looked up at him, blue-gray eyes wide and unwavering, and let out a quiet sound that wasn't a cry or a coo. It was something softer, like a question. Keanu crouched beside the couch and gently laid her down on the pillow, watching as she slowly blinked herself back to sleep. Then he walked over to the table and picked up his journal again. He didn't write a full sentence this time, just 2 words. She knows. He didn't know what Aria knew or how much, but something inside him, something deep and primal, was sure of one thing. This connection between them wasn't just emotional. It was something else. Something that pulled at him like gravity, like destiny. Later that night, unable to sleep, Keanu walked into the nursery he had quickly set up with the help of a few friends. It was still sparse. A crib, a soft rug, a small bookshelf already filling with children's books and astronomy volumes. In the corner stood a mobile made of glowing planets that spun slowly in the dark. Aria lay in her crib, eyes wide open, watching the planets move. As they turned, her gaze tracked each one perfectly, as if she already understood their place in the sky. Keanu sat in the rocking chair beside her. "One day," he said softly, "I'll take you to see them. Not in books, not in lights, the real ones." She blinked, as if she believed him. In that quiet room, with stars painted on the ceiling and the soft hum of night around them, Keanu made a silent vow, one he didn't fully understand yet. He would protect her. He would follow this connection wherever it led, even if it meant rewriting his life to do so. Keanu didn't notice it at first. In those early days, every sound Aria made was magical. Her gurgles, her laugh, even the little hiccups she'd get after a bottle. All of it felt like music from a world he had forgotten how to hear. But then, something shifted. One morning, as he cradled her on his lap while reading from a worn collection of old poems, she suddenly froze at a word. He had just whispered the final line, "In search of truth," when Aria went completely still. Her tiny fingers, which had been swatting playfully at the air moments earlier, dropped to her sides. Her eyes locked on his. Wide, unblinking, too aware. He stopped reading. "You okay, little one?" he asked softly. She didn't cry, didn't fuss, just stared at him with those big, impossible eyes. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked toward the window, where the rising sun cut a line across the wooden floor. Her lips parted just enough for a single soft sound to escape, almost like a hum, a note. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Keanu's skin tingled. That afternoon, he tested it. He repeated the poem. Her reaction was the same. Stillness, locking eyes, the sound. But when he changed the word, replacing truth with light, her reaction did. He said truth again, stillness, hum. That night, as he changed her diaper under the soft glow of a warm lamp, he spoke a different word. Film. Aria's head snapped to attention so fast it startled him. Her eyes didn't blink. She stared at his mouth like she was trying to understand the shape of the word. Her fists tightened and loosened slowly, as if she were holding something only she could feel. Later, by the fireplace, Keanu told Hector what he'd seen. "You think she recognizes words already?" Hector asked, holding a mug of herbal tea, one brow raised. "She's not just reacting," Keanu said. "She's processing, choosing when to respond." Hector considered that for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe she's just brilliant." Keanu leaned back, watching Aria in her little woven basket. She was staring at the firelight, her fingers twitching to the rhythm of its flicker, like it was telling her something. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But I've seen brilliant babies. This is different." The next day confirmed it. A fan had mailed Keanu a package, a framed, vintage copy of the first shooting script from a forgotten black and white film he once loved. He hadn't thought about the movie in years. He didn't even open the frame right away. It sat on the kitchen island while he finished feeding Aria. She had been fussy until she noticed it. She reached for it, stretching both arms toward the frame, babbling with sudden, surprising urgency. When Keanu placed it in front of her, she touched the glass with one small hand. And then she hummed the tune. The melody was unmistakable. Keanu froze as the soft, breathy hum escaped Aria's lips. She didn't sing words, just the rise and fall of a tune that hadn't crossed his ears in over 20 years. It was the closing score from The Last Horizon, a cult classic he'd seen in an old theater as a teenager. The theme was never commercially released. The film had faded into obscurity. And yet here was a baby, barely a few months old, mimicking it perfectly from memory. His heart thudded in his chest. He replayed the original melody in his head. Every note matched. It wasn't just similar, it was precise. But how? Keanu gently lifted Aria into his arms and held her close. "Where did you hear that?" he whispered. She looked at him, eyes calm and curious, then laid her head on his chest. That evening, Keanu stood in the hallway outside his bedroom, holding the script in one hand. He studied the paper, turning it over, searching for clues. Was there something embedded in the frame? A sensor? A speaker? He tapped the glass. Nothing. Back in the nursery, Aria was calm again, but when he whispered the word camera while watching her expression, she shifted. A tiny smile curved her mouth. Her fingers opened and closed as if grasping invisible air. It wasn't just words now. It was symbols, ideas. Later, he pulled out an old projector and played The Last Horizon on the living room wall. Aria sat propped in a baby lounger, her eyes fixed on the flickering black and white images. As the music swelled during the final scene, she began to sway. Her lips moved again, not humming this time, but shaping soundless words. Keanu couldn't breathe. He sat beside her, trying to remain calm, but his mind raced. The melody, the word associations, the moment she touched that old script. This wasn't coincidence. Something was happening beyond logic. He called Maria, a longtime friend who had worked in child development before becoming a screenwriter. She arrived the next morning, curious but skeptical. "I'm telling you," Keanu said, handing her a list of words he'd been tracking. "She responds to these every time, and not just physically. She seems to anticipate them." Maria knelt in front of Aria and smiled. "Let's test it," she said. "Moon." Aria blinked slowly. Then stars. Aria's gaze turned upward, toward the ceiling, as if instinctively following something unseen. Maria glanced at Keanu. Okay, that could be random." Then she whispered, "Truth." Aria tilted her head, stared straight at Maria, then hummed the same note again. Maria stood up slowly, her voice hushed. "Keanu, I've studied sensory cues in infants for over a decade. This isn't random. She's responding to abstract concepts." Keanu ran a hand through his hair. "I think she's remembering something." Maria frowned. "She's a baby, Keanu. Babies don't have memories like that." He looked back at Aria. Then maybe she's not just a baby. That night, Keanu lay awake with Aria asleep on his chest, her tiny breaths rising and falling in rhythm with his own. The soft tick of the grandfather clock downstairs kept time in the quiet dark. But Keanu wasn't thinking about time the way most people did anymore. He replayed the past week like a reel of old film. Each strange reaction, each whispered word that made her blink or hum. The way she seemed to recognize melodies no one had played in decades. The way her little hands would reach out when he spoke of stars, and how, at just a few months old, she could calm him, with just a look. When Aria stirred slightly, her fingers brushing the fabric of his flannel shirt, he whispered, "Are you trying to tell me something, little one?" She didn't answer, of course, but in her sleep she smiled, a wide, serene smile that made his heart ache. The next day, he brought out a series of black and white photos from his early film career, scenes from movies long forgotten, costumes, sets, handwritten lines on aging script paper. He watched Aria closely. When he showed her a still image from his first breakout role, she stared for a long time, then slowly lifted one hand toward it. Her fingers tapped the air 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. He held his breath. Next, he laid out a page from a failed screenplay he had written in the 90s. It had never been filmed, never shown to anyone. Aria touched it, then burst into soft giggles. It chilled him to the bone. She knows, he whispered to himself. Somehow, she knows. The following evening, he sat in his study with his journal open. The fireplace cast warm light across the room. His pen hovered over the page. Then he began writing, slowly. Day 13. She responds to music like a composer, to words like a philosopher, to light, like a soul who remembers where it came from. Day 14. She's too alert, too intentional. Today she tracked a star through the skylight with her eyes for almost an hour. It's like she's waiting for something. Day 15. When I whispered truth, she turned her head. When I whispered camera, she smiled. When I said time, she hummed. This isn't normal. He set the pen down, rubbed his eyes, then looked across the room at her, peacefully sleeping in a portable bassinet by the window. She was beautiful, innocent, mysterious, and yet she felt familiar. Keanu stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. He touched her tiny hand. I don't know what's going on, he whispered, voice barely audible, but whatever it is, you're not alone. I'm here. We'll figure this out. Together. Outside, the stars blinked through the night sky, and Aria, still sleeping, began to hum again. It was just after sunset when the intercom at Keanu's gate crackled to life. The long winding drive up to his home rarely saw uninvited guests. Nestled among trees on a quiet ridge, the property was intentionally isolated. Hector, ever vigilant, checked the security monitor and froze at the sight. An older woman in a gray pea coat stood outside the front gate. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, her expression calm yet urgent. Can I help you? Hector asked through the intercom. My name is Dr. Evelyn Park, she said, her voice clear despite her age. I've come to speak with Mr. Reeves. It's about Aria. Keanu was upstairs, rocking Aria gently in his arms, humming the same melody she'd picked up from the old movie script. When Hector relayed the visitor's name and message, Keanu felt his stomach tighten. She mentioned Aria, he repeated. Yes, by name, said it was urgent. 5 minutes later, Keanu stepped outside, bundled in a knit sweater and jeans. His face was serious, cautious. Evelyn stood just beyond the gate, her hands folded in front of her, eyes meeting his with the kind of intensity that didn't flinch under pressure. How do you know Aria? Keanu asked calmly. Evelyn didn't smile. Because I knew her mother, and I was part of the reason she ran. That stopped him. He studied her, looking for any sign of dishonesty, malice, or misdirection. But what he saw was something else entirely. Regret. I think we should talk inside, he said. They sat in his quiet living room, the hum of the fireplace low in the background. Aria had just fallen asleep in her crib upstairs, and Keanu's eyes flicked toward the baby monitor resting beside his TV. I don't get many strangers on this mountain, he said softly, and I've got every reason to be wary right now. Evelyn nodded. You should be. But I didn't come here with threats. I came here with answers. The kind you won't find in any file. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Then start at the beginning. Evelyn exhaled slowly and glanced at the fire. Her voice softened, as if stepping back through time. There was a program. Not military, not corporate, but somewhere in between. It started 12 years ago under a nonprofit medical banner, the Aurora Initiative. We were studying children born with something different. Not mutations, not disabilities, but patterns. Recurring traits, things we couldn't explain with traditional genetics. Keanu watched her carefully. What kind of traits? Evelyn's gaze returned to him. Cognitive premonition, emotional patterning, lucid dreaming with statistically predicted outcomes. These weren't just smart kids, Mr. Reeves. They were something else entirely, and Aria's mother was our brightest subject. Keanu sat very still. Evelyn's words didn't sound like the script of a sci-fi film. They didn't carry the tone of fantasy. Instead, they felt clinical, measured, heavy with a weight only truth could hold. He spoke quietly. "You're saying Aria's mother wasn't just part of the program. She was the program?" Evelyn nodded. "Her name was Isla Monroe. She was 17 when she came into our study. Precocious, curious, beautiful but lonely. Her file listed her as an orphan, but she wasn't there because of hardship. She volunteered. She wanted to understand why she was different. She used to say she could feel things before they happened. Conversations, moods, even tragedy. She described a constant hum in the back of her mind, like the future whispering through walls." Keanu leaned back. "What happened to her?" "She got pregnant." Evelyn's eyes dropped for a moment, her voice trembling just slightly. "That wasn't part of the plan. We weren't set up to manage expectant mothers, especially not one with her profile. There was no record of a partner, no DNA data. But Isla said the child was meant to come, that it wasn't an accident." "And the program?" Keanu asked. "They changed. The directors wanted to observe the child's development. Isla realized it too late. She fled in the middle of the night, 6 months along. Took only what she could carry. We never saw her again." Keanu's chest tightened. "And now the child's on my doorstep." "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "And not by coincidence." Keanu stood and walked toward the fire. His hands rested on the mantel, eyes staring into the flames. "He knew she was in danger," he said. "He did," Evelyn replied. "And she must have planned it for years. Aria wasn't meant to grow up in a lab or behind glass. Isla believed that someone who understood presence, someone who saw beyond fame and data, could raise her." "Right." He turned. "Why me?" Evelyn looked at him as if the answer was written in his bones. "She knew you, not personally, but deeply. She followed your interviews, your choices. She kept a copy of your book of letters to your younger self. She said, 'You believe in the soul. You don't just talk about truth, you live it.'" Keanu's jaw clenched. The room felt impossibly quiet. Evelyn rose from her chair. "I know this is a lot, but if Aria stays with you, others will come looking. You need to be prepared. They'll call it custody, they'll call it research. But I've seen what happens to children who shine too brightly." Keanu stared into her eyes. "And what happens now?" Evelyn glanced up toward the quiet baby monitor. Depends on how much you're willing to believe and how far you're willing to go to protect someone who might not be entirely explainable." Keanu walked Evelyn to the door as the sky outside darkened to velvet blue. The mountain air had grown colder. He folded his arms, not from the chill, but from the weight of everything she had just revealed. Before stepping out, Evelyn turned one last time. "There's one more thing," she said softly. "The birthmark on Aria's shoulder. You saw it?" He nodded. "It's shaped like an old film camera. That mark wasn't random. Isla said it appeared during the 3rd trimester, clear, defined. She believed it was more than a quirk of genetics. She called it a symbol, a message for the one who would find her." Keanu frowned. "Why a film camera?" Evelyn's eyes held a strange glimmer. "Because Aria doesn't just process moments, she remembers them. Not just her own. She's tapped into some reservoir of memory that doesn't belong to any one person. Isla used to call it recorded light, the idea that some souls carry echoes of stories they've never lived. And somehow, Aria remembers them." Keanu was quiet. "Stories from the past or the future?" he asked. "Possibly both," Evelyn said. "Or something else entirely." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "If Aria really is what Isla believes she was, then she's not just a child who needs protection. She's a child who may one day teach us what it means to truly remember who we are. With that, she walked out into the night. Her car disappeared into the trees, leaving only the hush of wind through the pine needles. Keanu stood at the window long after she was gone, watching the last of the taillights vanish. Upstairs, he found Aria awake in her crib, not crying, just staring at the ceiling, completely calm. When she saw him, her lips curled into a small, drowsy smile. He walked over and scooped her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Her tiny hand reached for his face like it always did, fingers brushing the line of his jaw. Her touch always stilled something in him. "I met someone tonight," he whispered. "She says you're not just special, Aria. She says you were chosen." The baby blinked slowly. "I don't know what I believe yet," he continued, "but I do know this. You were brought here for a reason, and I'm not going anywhere." He sat in the rocking chair by the window, the stars blinking awake in the dark sky above. Aria rested her head on his shoulder and exhaled a soft sigh. Outside, the forest was silent, but inside, something had shifted forever. The air in the room had shifted. Keanu sat in silence, Aria cradled in his arms, her tiny fingers brushing the collar of his flannel shirt. Across from him, Dr. Evelyn Park's gaze didn't waver. The fire crackled in the background, but it couldn't compete with the tension settling between them. "You said there were others," Keanu said slowly, carefully, as if he were speaking through fog. "Other children like Aria?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but she might be the last." She set a small leather notebook on the coffee table between them. It looked old, the edges worn and cracked, as if it had been carried in pockets for years. She opened it gently, flipping through pages until she found a section filled with diagrams. Brain scans, color-coded charts, and then photos, black and white, of young children, eyes wide, staring straight into the camera, almost as if they knew something the adults didn't. "They called them the awakened," Evelyn said. "Children born under strange circumstances, unexplainable patterns in their cognition. One spoke 3 full sentences before her first birthday. Another memorized books just by hearing them read aloud once." Keanu looked down at Aria. She was humming softly, her cheek against his chest. Evelyn leaned forward. "They weren't trained. They weren't tested into their abilities. They were born different, as if they already remembered something the rest of us forgot." Keanu didn't speak. He was thinking about Aria watching the moon for long stretches, her humming of melodies from nowhere, her reactions to words like truth and film, as if they weren't just concepts, but warnings. "They weren't just smart," Evelyn said. "They had something we called temporal intuition." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means they sensed things. Dreams about places they hadn't seen, feelings about people they had never met. Premonitions, if you want the old word. But it was deeper, like their minds were tuned to something we couldn't measure. Possibilities. Futures." Keanu looked up sharply. "You're saying she sees the future?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "Not the future. Possible futures. Threads of time. Choices that haven't happened yet but are already pulling at her. It's why she reacts the way she does. She isn't remembering. She's feeling ahead." The fire snapped again. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The sound of it whispered against the windows like a question no one wanted to answer. Keanu held Aria tighter. "So what happened to the others?" Evelyn's face darkened. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper from the notebook. It was a photocopy of a government memo, stamped confidential. The title read, "Project EOS, Terminated Subjects." She laid it on the table but didn't let go. "You need to understand, Mr. Reeves," she said. "What's following Aria isn't curiosity. It's regret and fear." Keanu's eyes dropped to the paper. He hadn't even started reading it, but already something inside him knew this was bigger than he'd ever imagined. Keanu stared at the page Evelyn had placed before him. The memo's faded ink and redacted lines gave it an eerie weight, but what remained visible told a chilling story. Terms like behavioral containment, subject leakage, and asset relocation leapt out at him. He skimmed further down and froze. Subject 12. Terminated after exhibiting unsanctioned projection patterns. Subject 14. Vanished during transfer. Subject 17. Deceased under unclear circumstances. Subject 18. Unknown. Last recorded location, Denver. Keanu looked up. She was born in Colorado. Evelyn nodded solemnly. Aria's mother was Subject 18's sister. Keanu felt a chill tighten at the back of his neck. He looked down at Aria. Her eyes were now open, blinking slowly, studying his face, like she knew they were speaking about her. She reached up, pressing her hand to his jaw. Soft. Intentional. She knows when she's being spoken about, Evelyn said, even if she doesn't have the words yet. Keanu's voice was low. Why did the program shut down? There was a shift in leadership, Evelyn said carefully. What began as a cognitive development initiative was repurposed. The project's goal changed from observation to extraction. Extraction of what? Abilities, replication, control. Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. They stopped caring about the children. They started treating them like code to be copied, like tools. Keanu exhaled hard, and Aria's mother ran. Yes, Evelyn said. She escaped with Aria and disappeared for nearly a year. She must have known they were close. That's why she left the baby with you. Keanu's mind spun. But why me? Evelyn hesitated. Because you have a reputation. Not the Hollywood kind, the soul kind. You've lost people. Loved them fiercely. Walked through grief without letting it corrupt you. Her mother believed you could protect Aria, not just physically, but spiritually. Keanu blinked, overcome. He thought about how Aria had stopped crying the moment he'd picked her up. How she responded to guitar strings, to his voice. How she smiled at the words, stars, like she remembered them from another life. He rubbed his hands together, slow. What happens now? They depends, Evelyn said. They haven't found her yet, but they will. And when they do, they won't ask nicely. They'll use legal channels, pressure, intimidation. Maybe worse. Keanu's voice steadied. Then they'll have to go through me. Evelyn gave a tired smile. I thought you'd say that. Aria let out a soft hum, almost musical, and pressed her cheek to Keanu's chest. It sounded like a lullaby, like a message. Evelyn leaned back, suddenly quiet. There's one more thing, she said. But I wasn't sure if I should tell you. Keanu met her eyes. Tell me everything. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she feared the shadows might be listening. There's a reason Aria reacts the way she does. It's not just intuition, it's resonance. Certain children in the program were found to respond to specific frequencies, emotions, even memories that weren't their own. Keanu frowned. Memories that weren't their own? Yes, like echoes from something not yet lived. Evelyn opened her satchel and carefully unrolled a thin sheet of holographic film. On it, a blurry diagram showed waveforms in shifting light. This is neural resonance data, taken from Aria's earliest scans. Her mind isn't just processing her environment, it's reaching beyond it. Beyond it, how? Evelyn hesitated, then said quietly, Aria's dreams predict outcomes, not just basic ones, large ones, catastrophes, political shifts, technological breakthroughs. She dreams them before their public knowledge. We used to call it temporal intuition. Keanu stared at the film, speechless. He felt Aria shift against his chest and let out a soft sigh. Her little hand rested over his heart. "She's not magic," Evelyn added gently. "She's not some messiah. She's just a child, but a child whose brain has somehow connected to layers of probability most of us never perceive." Keanu blinked. "Is she the only one?" Evelyn looked away. "There were others, once, but their fates are uncertain. Many of us believed they were relocated. Some say they didn't survive. And a few, like Aria, were hidden." Keanu's hand instinctively cupped the back of Aria's head, shielding her. "You said you weren't sure if you should tell me. Why?" "Because the more you know, the more danger you're in," Evelyn said. "This isn't just a story about a child. It's about control, legacy, and secrets governments have buried for decades. If they realize how much she's capable of, they'll stop at nothing to get her back." Silence fell. Outside, the wind brushed gently through the trees around Keanu's cabin. Aria stirred, but didn't wake. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, innocent. Keanu looked down at her, then up at Evelyn. "I don't care what she is or what she can do," he said. "She's a child. She deserves love, not labs." Evelyn exhaled. "Then you're exactly who her mother hoped you'd be." Aria opened her eyes and smiled at that moment, as if she already knew. And from that second on, Keanu understood something deeper than science or fate. Whatever Aria was, she was his to protect. Keanu stood by the large window in his study, the stars barely visible beyond the veil of mist drifting over the pines. The baby monitor on the table beside him gave off a faint hum, the signal steady. Aria was asleep. But his thoughts weren't. He had been here before. This silence, this stillness. It used to be comforting, a quiet place to bury himself in books, scripts, guitar strings. But now, it carried weight, because the silence was no longer just silence. It was a mirror, one that reflected everything he hadn't faced in years. He picked up his old journal, the one he hadn't touched since his early 30s. The pages had yellowed around the edges, the ink fading, but his words were still there. The heartbreaks, the questions, the longing. Tonight, though, he didn't write about movies or fame or memories of pain. He wrote about Aria, about the way she looked up when he entered the room, like she had been waiting for him. About how her fingers curled tightly around his shirt when he lifted her from the crib, refusing to let go. And about the sound she made earlier that evening, soft, breathy, like she was trying to speak. It hadn't been random. It had sounded like the word. He stared at that single word on the page, circled it, then underlined it. That's what she had become. Not a burden, not a mystery. The realization hit harder than he expected. It wasn't just that she needed him. He needed her. Not in a protective, paternal way, but in the way a drifting soul clings to something solid after years of floating. He set the journal down, his hands trembling slightly. His mind went back to those dark stretches of time, the years when he smiled through premieres and interviews, but felt hollow inside. The days when grief had made every heartbeat feel borrowed. He remembered the moments he would wake in the middle of the night, aching for something he couldn't name. Not fame, not companionship, just meaning. And now, somehow, impossibly, meaning had arrived, in a wicker basket with a lavender blanket, and a note that still made his hands shake when he read it. He turned to the monitor again. Aria's breathing was steady. He could see the soft rise and fall of her chest in the dim glow of the nightlight. She was safe, for now. He crossed the room slowly, careful not to make noise, and opened the door to her room. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Keanu stepped inside and stood at the edge of her crib. She looked so small, so still, and yet everything in his life now revolved around her. He leaned over and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. "I don't know who you are," he whispered, voice catching, "but I think you're the reason I'm still here." Aria shifted, her lips parting in sleep. A small sound escaped. It sounded like she whispered back. He sat in the rocking chair beside her crib, the same one he hadn't used since his sister Kim was sick. It had collected dust for years in storage, but when Aria arrived, he had brought it up without thinking. Something about its quiet creak in the night reminded him of time passing gently instead of crashing forward. Aria shifted again in her sleep, her hand brushing the edge of the blanket. Keanu watched her, still trying to process everything Evelyn Park had revealed just days earlier. Temporal intuition. It sounded like science fiction. But nothing about Aria had ever been normal, not from the first moment she stopped crying in his arms. He reached for the small baby book he had started keeping, not the official kind, but one he was filling with sketches and poems and thoughts. On the latest page, he had written a question in the top corner. Why me? He still didn't have an answer, but the more time passed, the more he stopped needing one. Aria didn't need an explanation. She needed presence. She needed someone to hear her tiny laughter and hum along with her when she mimicked guitar melodies. She needed someone who would choose her again and again. And Keanu was beginning to understand that perhaps, after all the roles he had played, this one wasn't a part. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't a break from acting. It was the first thing in years that felt completely true. He thought about the child services visit scheduled for next week. They would assess the long-term plan for Aria placement, legal guardianship, options. That word, options, tightened his chest. Because even though he wasn't her father by blood, he knew something sacred had already passed between them. A bond forged not in biology, but in choice. He had chosen to pick her up, to hold her when no one else would, to stay when he could have walked away. And somehow, in the small spaces between diaper changes and late-night lullabies, she had chosen him too. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor for a long time. The night outside was deepening. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere down the hill, the coyotes cried. He stood slowly and looked at her again. Her face was turned toward the wall now, peaceful, unaware of the storm quietly building inside him. But the decision was already made. She wouldn't let anyone take her, no matter what came next. No matter who showed up with files or legal papers or warnings about secret programs. He would fight for her, not because he had to, but because it was the first time in years he felt something inside his soul reignite. Purpose, not the kind that comes from scripts or applause, but the kind that arrives quietly at dawn in the form of a child who looks up and calls a stranger home. Morning came soft and silver. The sun broke over the mountain ridge and light spilled across the wooden floor of Keanu's cabin like a quiet promise. He was already awake, already holding Aria in the crook of his arm. She had stirred just before dawn, murmuring in her sleep, and when he'd gone to check on her, her tiny hand had reached up reflexively. That small gesture undid him. Now she was cradled against his chest, her fingers wrapped tightly around one fold of his flannel shirt. Keanu walked slowly through the house, barefoot, moving as if the walls themselves could feel the shift inside him. On the kitchen table, the folded note from her mother still sat untouched since the day it arrived. He hadn't dared to throw it away. He hadn't reread it either, not yet, but its words echoed in everything. She is not safe. You're the only one I trust. He looked down at Aria. She blinked up at him, half dreaming still, and then, clear as crystal, she whispered something he didn't expect. Oh, it wasn't babble, it wasn't coincidence. It was soft, purposeful. His breath caught. She reached up and touched his cheek. Something cracked open inside him. In that moment, he thought of everything he had lost. Jennifer, the child they had never gotten to meet, the years afterward filled with silence and retreat. He had accepted, long ago, that life was meant to be endured, not deeply lived. But this child, this little miracle with moon-wide eyes, wasn't letting him endure. She was making him feel again. Love, wonder, grief, and something deeper than all of it, hope. He walked to the wall where he had once hung awards and film posters, things people said mattered. Without a word, he took one down. In its place, he pinned Aria's latest drawing. Just 2 scribbled shapes and a star. But to him, it meant everything. He turned back to her. "I don't know what you are," he whispered, "or why the universe sent you here. But I do know this." He paused. "You are not alone anymore." Her hand squeezed his collar. "And I'm not letting you go." He kissed her forehead. Outside, the wind lifted again through the trees, and the cabin filled with a light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Keanu held her tightly, anchoring her to the earth, but also anchoring himself. Because in that moment, he wasn't a movie star. He wasn't a guardian. He wasn't a man searching for peace. He was simply a man who had found a reason to stay, and her name was Aria. The silence of Keanu's mountaintop sanctuary had always felt like safety, but that illusion shattered the moment Hector walked into the security room with his jaw clenched and his eyes sharper than usual. "Sir," he said, voice low, "we've got movement." Keanu looked up from the baby monitor on the coffee table. Aria was asleep in her crib, her tiny hand wrapped around the ear of a stuffed rabbit. For a moment he hoped Hector meant deer or foxes. But Hector didn't deal in false alarm. He pulled up the footage on the wall monitor. A matte black SUV slowed as it reached the narrow bend just before the private drive. Then another appeared. Same model, same tint, no plates. Neither vehicle entered the property, but they circled the road once. Slowly, deliberately. Keanu stared at the screen, his chest tightened. "How long were they here?" 11 minutes total, Hector said. "They never stepped out. But that's not what worries me." He toggled to a secondary view. One of the perimeter cameras, the one facing the lower fence near the ridge, was blacked out. Iblee disabled it. Someone was on foot. Keanu's fists clenched. "Did they leave anything behind?" "No sign of it yet. I'll do a ground sweep." Keanu nodded but didn't speak. He walked quietly to Aria's room. She was still asleep, but her breath was shaky. A whimper escaped her lips, and suddenly she sat bolt upright, eyes wide in the dark. "No men," she said softly. "No take." The words made Keanu freeze. Not because of what she said, but how she said it. Like she was remembering something. Or warning him. He picked her up and held her close, whispering gentle reassurances against her hair. "You're safe, Aria. I've got you." She leaned her head against his chest and murmured a word that sent chills through him again. "Dark cars." He sat with her through the night, rocking slowly, heart heavy with unease. At dawn, after Aria finally drifted back to sleep in his arms, Keanu took no chances. He called in a private security firm he trusted, former military professionals who specialized in quiet protection. Silent reinforcements. The house perimeter was swept, sensors recalibrated, and 2 guards were posted discreetly at the north and south ends of the property. Cameras were upgraded, drones deployed. Hector didn't ask questions. He simply moved with urgency and discipline, as if he'd known this day might come. Later that morning, Keanu found Aria sitting in the sunroom, crayons scattered around her like a burst of color against the polished wood floor. She'd drawn what looked like stars and moons at first, but in the middle of the page was a shape he didn't recognize. A spiral, sharp-edged, with intersecting lines through its curves. "Did you draw this one for me?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. Aria nodded, then pointed to the center of the spiral. "That circle," she whispered. Keanu stared at the drawing. The spiral wasn't just random. It had rhythm, geometry, intent. The jagged strokes cutting through it looked like warnings, slashes to block something out, or hold something in. He gently picked up the paper and placed it beside Evelyn's research folder, which she had left behind after their last conversation. He didn't expect anything to come of it, but when he opened to the page marked symbolic patterns, his breath caught. There it was, the same spiral, not identical but disturbingly close. The notes beside it read, "Observed in recurring dreams of Subject 12, Subject 7, and final case study. Project Aria. Appears without prompting. Associated with intense distress and preverbal fear responses. Origin unknown." Keanu blinked. It was real. He picked up Aria, who had followed him into the room and was now tugging at the corner of the paper. "Where did you see this, little one?" he whispered. Aria didn't answer. She just pressed her palm flat against the page, like it grounded her. Later, Evelyn arrived in person after Keanu sent her a photo of the drawing. She walked into the living room, already pale. When she saw the spiral next to Aria's crayon version, she stopped moving altogether. The employee. "She remembers," Evelyn whispered. Keanu nodded. "What does it mean?" Evelyn sank into the armchair. "We think it's something embedded in their subconscious. Maybe from prenatal programming. The spiral showed up in every child before the shutdown, but it always meant one thing: danger. And she's drawing it again now. That means someone's trying to finish what they started." He didn't need to ask who. The vehicles, the disabled camera, the broken silence. "You told me this project was shut down," Keanu said, his voice low. "You said Aria was the last." I said, "That's what we believed. But if she's showing that spiral now, it means the people behind it are still operating. Quietly, illegally, and they've found her." Keanu walked to the window. Aria sat near the glass, babbling to the trees. She reached for a bird, waving, smiling, still a child, despite the mysteries wrapped around her. "She woke up last night crying. She said, 'No men, no take.'" He glanced at Evelyn. She said, "Dark cars." Evelyn didn't speak. She looked shaken, the kind of fear that comes not from imagination but memory. "I need the full truth," Keanu said. "All of it, no more fragments." Evelyn hesitated. Then she stood, walked to the window beside him, and nodded slowly. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll sit down. I'll tell you everything. But for tonight, watch her closely. If she draws again, write it down. Record it. Her instincts may be ahead of what we can prove." Keanu didn't sleep that night. Aria slept soundly, but he stayed on the floor beside her crib, a notebook open in one hand and the crayon spiral pressed into his mind like a warning carved into stone. The next morning brought frost on the grass and an eerie stillness in the air. Keanu stepped out onto his porch, thermos in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the absence of movement didn't calm him. It only made the silence feel watched. Inside, Aria sat at the dining table with her crayons, unusually focused. Keanu placed his thermos down and crouched beside her. "What are you drawing today?" he asked softly. She didn't look at him, but she smiled. Her small hands moved with purpose, no aimless swirls this time. This wasn't play, it was memory. She finished the page and pushed it toward him with a proud, deliberate gesture. This time, it wasn't a spiral. It was a face, an unfamiliar man. Shaded eyes, square jaw, no smile. His mouth was a single black line. He wore a suit, and behind him was the same spiral, almost like a shadow rising above his shoulder. Keanu stared. "Aria, do you know who this is?" She didn't speak. She pointed to the window. Keanu stood up fast and walked to the blinds. A black SUV had parked just beyond the main driveway, half concealed behind a row of trees. Engine off, no visible movement inside, but it was watching. He grabbed his phone and dialed Hector's secure number. "Yeah," Hector answered immediately. "The back. This time, parked off the road, one vehicle. I'll be there in 10. Keanu hung up and turned back to Aria, who was now drawing again. This time, the spiral was on the man's chest. By the time Hector arrived, the SUV was gone. They checked the security footage. Once again, the camera nearest that section of the property had gone black, exactly 9 minutes before Keanu spotted the vehicle. Hector frowned. "They're cycling through blind spots. Someone knows how this place is wired. This isn't random, it's surveillance." "Testing response time." Keanu nodded. "They're getting closer." Back inside, Aria was humming softly, rocking her stuffed bear in her arms like it was a fragile secret. When Keanu sat beside her, she looked up and said a word so softly it nearly escaped him. "Watch." "Watch what?" he asked. She pointed toward the sketch again. Then she whispered, "Man in suit, watches." Keanu's jaw tightened. He looked at Hector. "We need to double the perimeter coverage, full thermal scans. And I want that blind spot patched today. No more 9-minute windows." "You got it." As Hector left, Keanu held the drawing of the man in the suit, now annotated with the spiral, and slipped it into Evelyn's folder. Later that night, he sat beside Aria's crib as she drifted to sleep, her hand loosely wrapped around his thumb. He whispered, "They don't get to have you." Outside, the wind stirred the pines, and somewhere beyond the trees, the watchers were still waiting. But now, so was Keanu, and he wasn't afraid. Evelyn returned to Keanu's cabin just after dawn. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped inside, clutching a manila folder thick with papers. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her eyes scanned the space until they landed on the small figure sitting cross-legged near the fireplace. Aria. The little girl had drawn again. Scattered across the floor were pages filled with spirals, geometric shapes, and a familiar pattern that Evelyn hadn't seen in over a decade. It wasn't just a child's scribble. The central shape, a spiral within a square, mirrored a symbol from the classified program Evelyn once worked on. Something buried so deeply in government archives, only a handful of people had clearance to see it. Keanu looked up from where he sat on the couch, arms resting on his knees. His eyes were weary but alert. "We started drawing like this last night," he said. "Didn't say much, just kept going. Is that something you've seen before?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She crouched beside Aria, who glanced up briefly, then returned to shading a corner of the spiral with her crayon. "This sequence," Evelyn whispered, flipping open her folder and sliding out a printed schematic, "was a communications overlay. We used it to tag encrypted data flowing out of a now-defunct facility in Nevada, a place we thought had been decommissioned 10 years ago." Keanu leaned closer. "You're telling me she's drawing something from inside a top-secret program?" he asked, voice quiet. "She's not just drawing it," Evelyn said. "She's remembering it." Keanu swallowed hard. He didn't want to believe it, but he also couldn't deny what he'd seen. Aria had always been different. But this wasn't just intuition or strange expressions. This was data. Symbols, patterns linked to a part of Evelyn's past she had tried to forget. Later that afternoon, Keanu packed a small overnight bag and secured Aria in her car seat. He told her it was a road trip, something quiet, just the two of them. They left before sunset. Evelyn stayed behind at the cabin. She told Keanu she needed to dig further, to cross-section the symbol with project records she still had access to. But once they left, she did more than that. She connected her laptop to the home's network and began tracing recent data uploads. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. At precisely 2:11 a.m. the night before, several encrypted files had been uploaded to a private server Evelyn maintained off-grid. No password had been entered, no device had been used. The signal came from inside the cabin. More precisely, from the living room. From the exact location where Aria had been sitting. Evelyn opened the files. Each one contained sequences of code written in a syntax she hadn't seen since her days working on synthetic neural interface modeling. But these weren't fabricated simulations. They were predictions of real-world events. Patterns of climate shifts, stock market behavior, power grid vulnerabilities. And all of it had been generated without a keystroke, no interface, no terminal access, just presence. Evelyn's hands trembled again as she whispered to herself, "She's not just remembering, she's emitting." Evelyn stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel wonder or dread. Aria wasn't hacking. She wasn't even aware of the transmission. The files were generated purely by her proximity. Just being in the room had somehow triggered the upload. It was as if her mind existed on a frequency that didn't need wires or keys. She wasn't accessing technology. She was speaking to it. Evelyn backed away from the desk slowly, letting the reality settle. This went far beyond anything they had theorized in the Awakened Children program. Predictive intuition was one thing, but this was the synthesis of human thought and machine language. A biological transmitter, an emotional server. Evelyn turned toward the window, looking out into the woods beyond Keanu's property. Somewhere out there, he was driving Aria down winding back roads, thinking he was keeping her safe. But the truth was more complicated now. The facility the symbol referred to wasn't just any research site. It had been the origin point, the place where the first successful tests occurred, where Aria's mother had worked, where Evelyn herself had nearly lost her career, exposing the truth. The spiral wasn't just a pattern, it was a signature, a beacon, and someone else might have seen it. Just after midnight, Keanu parked the car at a small, nondescript inn near Lake Arrowhead, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and privacy came standard. Aria had fallen asleep hours ago, her head resting gently against his arm as he drove through darkness and snow. He carried her to their room, tucked her into the bed nearest the window, and sat beside her. The world outside was quiet, but his mind was anything but. The words from the note still echoed in his thoughts. "She is not safe." That phrase had haunted him from the moment he first read it. Keanu watched her sleeping form, her tiny chest rising and falling, one hand curled near her chin, a small crayon clutched in her fingers, even in sleep. Even now, she didn't let it go. Back at the cabin, Evelyn stood in the same living room where Aria had drawn that strange spiral. The crayons still lay scattered across the floor. She didn't touch them. Instead, she activated an old tablet she kept offline, one she used only for viewing government-era archives she'd encrypted herself years ago. She pulled up the facility's blueprints, cross-referenced them with the shapes Aria had drawn. Then she found it, a direct match. The spiral was more than symbolic. It was a floor map, the path to Sublevel 3, a room that was officially never built. A room where Evelyn had once seen a prototype that terrified her more than any child subject ever had. They called it the Oracle Room, a failed experiment in interfacing children's dreams with predictive AI models. The project was abandoned after 3 breakdowns and 1 unexplained disappearance. But maybe it hadn't been abandoned after all. Maybe Aria's mother hadn't just fled because of ethics. Maybe she had seen something. Maybe she had brought Aria into the world, knowing that only one person would ever understand how to keep her out of that room forever. Keanu. Evelyn sat down hard, heart pounding. She had to warn him. Just then her laptop pinged. Another upload. More files. She opened them. This time, the data stream wasn't numbers or code. It was sound. His voice. Distorted, faint, but undeniably there. A girl's voice whispering. At first, the words were hard to make out, tangled and static. But then Evelyn increased the audio gain and played it again. "Ain't see them. Not safe, Daddy, help." Evelyn froze. Her breath caught in her throat. That was Aria's voice. But she hadn't been speaking aloud. She had been dreaming. Even miles away, even while asleep, her consciousness had connected to Evelyn's system. And she had called out for Keanu, not just with fear, with trust, like he was the only one who could stop what was coming. Evelyn shut the laptop slowly. This wasn't a child with special talents anymore. This was something entirely new. Not a warning, not a mistake, a message. And it had just begun. Keanu sat on the back porch, the late evening sun casting a pale amber light over the valley below. Aria was asleep against his chest, wrapped snugly in a hand-knit blanket Evelyn had brought during her last visit. Her small breaths rose and fell in a perfect rhythm against his heartbeat. But tonight, he couldn't relax. Evelyn's voice still echoed in his ears, repeating the one phrase he wasn't sure how to absorb. She was designed, but not like they think. That morning, Evelyn had returned to the house with more than just data. She carried a manila folder filled with notes, ultrasound images, and handwritten letters. Documents retrieved from a private safe house in Montana, once used by Aria's mother, Celeste. The scientist, once part of a controversial prenatal research team, had gone silent years ago. The official story said she died in a hiking accident, but the truth was far more complicated. Inside the folder was the truth Evelyn hadn't shared until now. Celeste had been working on a sequence of dormant human genes, strands thought to be junk DNA. She believed these silent genes were remnants of a forgotten layer of human potential, abilities for intuitive problem-solving, emotional resonance, and empathic pattern recognition. The theory had been dismissed by the academic world as science fiction, but Celeste hadn't given up. Secretly, she activated the sequence during her own pregnancy, not through gene splicing or artificial edits, but through precisely timed environmental and dietary conditions, what she called epigenetic harmonics. Aria, born under this protocol, wasn't a genetically modified child. She was a natural evolution fast-forwarded. Evelyn looked at Keanu with eyes that didn't blink. She wasn't just enhanced. She was in vision. Keanu stared at the documents in disbelief. At first glance, they were impossibly detailed, backed by handwritten equations and even AI-generated simulations predicting how Aria's brain would evolve over time. But that wasn't the part that shook him most. Near the back of the folder was a letter. It was short, one page, in Celeste's elegant cursive. "Dear Mr. Reeves," it began, "you won't know me, but I've known of you for a long time. Every model I've run, every dream I've tracked, every future I've projected, Aria's path intersects with yours. Not for fame, not for safety, but for soul. You believe in it, even when others don't. You grieve for the world, and still get up to make it better. That's why I trust you with her." Keanu read the letter again, this time slower. The edges of the page trembled slightly in his hands, not from the breeze, but from something deeper, an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. Aria shifted in her sleep, one tiny hand clutching a fold in his shirt. It was as if she felt the weight of the words, too. You grieve for the world and still get up to make it better. He closed his eyes. That one sentence broke him, not because it flattered, but because it exposed all the years he'd spent trying to make sense of senseless loss, all the faces he remembered but couldn't touch anymore. Somehow this woman, this stranger, had seen him clearer than most people ever had. He turned to Evelyn, who had been silent since he finished the letter. "Why me?" he asked again. "Why would someone trust me with something this big?" She didn't hesitate. "Because Celeste didn't just believe in you emotionally, she modeled it. Dozens of simulations, In each one, Aria needed a protector, someone who wouldn't exploit her, wouldn't fear her, wouldn't turn her into a spectacle or a project. Only one outcome led to her thriving, not surviving, thriving. And it was with you. Keanu felt his throat tighten. That's not science, that's prophecy. Evelyn smiled faintly. Science and prophecy aren't always enemies. Sometimes they're just looking at the same mountain from different sides. Keanu looked back down at Aria. Her breathing was steady again, her cheeks rosy from sleep, her mouth open just a little, like she was murmuring to stars in her dreams. You said she was envisioned, he whispered. But for what? What is she supposed to do? Evelyn set the documents down gently on the table beside them. Celeste believed that Aria could be the beginning of a new kind of intelligence, what she called empathic cognition. That means her abilities don't just make her smarter, they make her more attuned to others, not like reading minds, but reading futures, emotional probabilities, outcomes. She doesn't just calculate what's likely to happen, she feels what should happen. And if nurtured right, that ability could guide humanity toward technologies rooted in compassion, not control. Keanu looked stunned. So, she's supposed to be some kind of oracle? No, Evelyn said, shaking her head. She's supposed to be a mirror, the kind of intelligence that reflects back who we're becoming, before we make irreversible mistakes. Keanu let out a slow breath. And I'm supposed to teach her how to survive all that? No, Evelyn said again, her voice softer now. You're supposed to remind her why it's worth it. That struck him deeper than he expected. The house was silent for a while, except for the gentle rustle of wind through pine trees and the occasional sleepy coo from Aria. A hawk circled far above in the purple-stained sky. Somewhere in the kitchen, the tea kettle clicked off automatically. Keanu spoke again, quietly. What about her mother? Evelyn's face changed. Celeste knew they were coming for her. That's why she left Aria with you. The last surveillance footage I could find shows her in a storage facility, burning documents. She didn't make it out, but she made sure Aria did. Keanu closed his eyes for a long moment, but when he opened them, he wasn't the same man. He was no longer wondering if he was the right person for the task. He was already becoming the one Aria needed. Later that evening, Keanu stood in the quiet of his upstairs hallway, staring into Aria's room. She was asleep again, her small body curled on the bed beneath soft blankets, one hand resting near the plush koala she'd begun to carry everywhere. Moonlight filtered in through the window and settled like silver dust across her face. He stepped in, slow and quiet, and sat on the floor beside her bed. I always thought the universe had no reason, he murmured, unsure if he was talking to Aria, to himself, or to Celeste's ghost. But then you showed up, in a basket, with a note, and a cry that stopped the second I touched you. He leaned forward, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. I thought I was done being needed. His voice cracked then, and he took a breath. He remembered the long, dark nights after losing Jennifer and their daughter. He remembered the silence that followed every burst of laughter on set, the emptiness that trailed every standing ovation. He remembered giving so much of himself to roles, only to return home to no one. But you, he whispered, you don't just need me, you see me. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the letter again. His fingers brushed over the words, as if rereading them in Braille. I tried to disappear. For years. I let the world think I was fine. Kind, quiet, functional. But part of me had stopped living. You, Aria, you woke that part up. Aria stirred in her sleep and made a small breathy sound. It wasn't quite a word. But it wasn't just noise either. Keanu leaned in. Say it again, he whispered. Aria's lips barely moved, but the sound came through clearer this time. It was soft, gentle, but unmistakable. It sounded like one word: come. He placed his hand over his heart. That one syllable meant everything. It meant she knew. It meant she felt safe. It meant she had already decided he was hers. Downstairs, Evelyn sat quietly by the fireplace, flipping through Celeste's second folder. She paused over a page showing a heat map of emotional resonance tests. The brightest red spot was labeled KR, Final Guardian Variable. She looked up as Keanu returned, his footsteps slower, steadier. "You knew," he said simply. "I hoped," Evelyn replied. "But now I know too." They sat across from each other in the flickering firelight. Keanu looked older tonight. Not in a worn-out way, but in the way trees look after a storm. Weathered, standing, and somehow even more rooted. "She's not going anywhere," he said, voice calm. "They can come knocking. They can bring court orders or wires or lies, but they won't get past me." Evelyn nodded. "I believe you." Keanu glanced toward the stairs, then back to the fire. "She's not a project. She's not a prophecy. She's a child." "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "And the world has forgotten what it means to raise a child without a price tag." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "Well, maybe it's time the world remembers." Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the pine trees that lined the mountain ridge. Somewhere beyond those trees were people who wanted Aria for their own designs, but inside that home, in that firelit room, there was something stronger than fear. There was decision. There was love. And from that night on, Keanu stopped wondering if he was meant to protect Aria. He started preparing for what she would one day become, because the truth wasn't just about who Aria was. It was about who she might help the world become if someone like Keanu Reeves could show her the way. And he would, no matter what came next. The letter arrived by private courier, unmarked except for a plain government crest on the envelope. It wasn't delivered to Keanu's mailbox. It was hand-carried directly to his front gate. Hector, his longtime security guard, found it tucked into the wrought iron latch just before sunrise, sealed with a thick red stamp that read, "Urgent, federal compliance required." Keanu stood at his kitchen table with the envelope unopened, his hand resting on it, as Aria sat in her high chair nearby, gnawing on a silicone teether shaped like a crescent moon. For the last week, tension had been building in the air around them like a pressure system waiting to break. Evelyn hadn't returned any calls. Drones had flown too low over the property twice, and Keanu had changed his phone number 3 days ago after receiving a series of anonymous messages that simply read, "She's not yours." He finally opened the envelope. The letter inside was direct, cold, and unmistakably serious. The agency didn't identify itself by name, only as a federally endorsed entity acting in the interest of national security. It cited clause after clause from obscure legislation. It didn't threaten violence. It didn't even mention Aria by name, but the meaning was clear. Surrender the child. She belongs to the state. Keanu didn't hesitate. That same afternoon, he sat down for a recorded interview with a trusted independent journalist, someone he had worked with years ago on a charity documentary. They arranged a neutral setting. Just 2 chairs, a dark backdrop, and a quiet camera crew. No studio lighting, no handlers. Keanu didn't reveal Aria's full story. He didn't name Evelyn or speak of enhancements or intelligence genes. Instead, he told a different truth. He said a child had been left at his door, that she was extraordinary, that someone, some system, wanted her not because she posed a threat, but because she offered a mirror to their own lack of humanity. "I don't know everything about this little girl," he said calmly, "but I know this. She has a soul, and whoever wants to take her sees her as a weapon. I see her as a child." By the time the interview aired online, it had reached 1 million views in under 2 hours. By nightfall, the number had tripled. Comments poured in. Hashtags trended globally. Soul Child, let her stay. Keanu protects. But the real storm hadn't started yet. That night, the silence around Keanu's mountain home wasn't peaceful. It was brittle. Too still. The kind of silence that pressed against the windows like an unspoken warning. Keanu sat awake in the nursery, a book in his lap and Aria asleep on his chest. She had fallen asleep to the rhythm of his voice, reading aloud from a collection of poetry, her breathing soft, her tiny hand curled around the edge of his flannel shirt. He thought the danger would come through lawyers, through legal pressure. He was wrong. Just past 2 a.m., the beam appeared. It was faint at first, a red dot dancing along the far side of the nursery window, sweeping almost lazily across the curtains. Keanu saw it instantly. His body went still. Every instinct from years of training on and off screen kicked in. He shifted his hand carefully, covering Aria's back, keeping her close and low. Then the beam paused, centered on the glass just above Aria's crib. Keanu didn't move. He breathed slowly. He counted to 5, then gently turned toward the baby monitor. Quiet. Aria didn't stir. With one smooth motion, he reached under the rocking chair's cushion and pressed a small switch beneath the armrest. A silent alarm that triggered the full lockdown sequence Hector had installed a month earlier. Security shutters began lowering from the roofline, inch by inch over every window of the house. Exterior floodlights flared to life. A high-frequency sonic deterrent began to hum at the edges of human hearing, enough to disorient any would-be intruder, just long enough to buy time. Keanu looked down. Aria stirred in her sleep, murmured something faint. A single word. Not mama, not dada. Hide. The breath left Keanu's lungs in a slow, stunned exhale. He clutched her a little tighter, stood up, and walked swiftly through the hall toward the hidden cellar door, already mentally preparing a route out of the city. By morning, they'd be gone. Keanu didn't sleep. He laid Aria gently in the reinforced travel bassinet beneath the floorboards of the hidden cellar, beside a stocked emergency kit and 2 bags packed days earlier, just in case. His hands moved with practiced calm, but his heart was not calm. He had hoped it would never come to this. By sunrise, news of his interview had reached nearly every major outlet. Headlines flooded social media. Keanu Reeves defies secret order. The Soul Child and her protector. Truth versus power. Millions watched the clip where he quietly said, "She's not property. She's not a weapon. She is a child with a soul, and I will protect her with mine." But the pressure was mounting. That morning, a new letter arrived by courier, unmarked again. This time, it wasn't legal language. It was a warning, typed plainly. You have 72 hours to comply, or you won't see her grow up. He burned it. Then he sat beside Aria, watching her tiny fingers explore the edges of her blanket, her eyes still half closed in sleep, but peaceful. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that soothed something in him, but not enough to forget. He picked up his phone. One number, memorized. "Evelyn, it's time, we're leaving." She didn't ask where, she only replied, "I'll meet you there." As Keanu closed the call, Aria opened her eyes and reached for him. "Safe," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Not yet, but soon." And in that small voice, from a child who should not have understood, came the words that sealed his resolve. "Maddie, go Stars." He nodded, lifting her into his arms. "First, we vanish," he whispered. "Then, we fight." The night after the laser dot appeared on Aria's nursery window, Keanu didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair beside her crib, listening to every sound the wind made, memorizing the shadows across the floorboards. His jaw was tight, heart thudding in the quiet. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was coming. and he wouldn't wait for them to knock. By morning, Evelyn had arrived with a plan. She walked in briskly, her coat dusted with snow, carrying a small, unmarked satchel and a phone with no identifiable brand. "We have a 48-hour window," she said, locking the front door behind her, "and we need to make it count." Keanu didn't need convincing. He had already packed a go-bag for Aria, diapers, bottles, her favorite lavender blanket, and a copy of the book he always read her at night, the one with the poem about stars finding their way home. Evelyn opened a manila folder on the kitchen table and pushed it toward him. Inside were forged travel documents, a fabricated report of a vehicle accident in Northern California, and a handwritten note she'd prepared. "An accident?" Keanu asked, eyeing the papers. "It needs to look like you're gone," Evelyn said softly. "Disappeared in the chaos. The moment they believe you're dead, they'll stop watching the roads and start digging up reports. We'll already be across the border by then." Keanu stared at her. "And Aria? They'll think she was with you." He nodded slowly. "Then let's vanish." By noon the next day, Keanu's vintage motorcycle, his favorite black and silver one, was found at the base of a ravine off a rarely used mountain road. A fire had been set, with enough precision to make the scene believable, but not enough to suggest a body had been recovered. Police were notified through anonymous channels. An investigation would begin, but without a license plate, it wouldn't lead anywhere quickly. Meanwhile, a small silver SUV quietly crossed into Canada at a private checkpoint, pre-cleared through diplomatic contacts Evelyn still held from her academic days. No one looked twice at the older couple in the front seat and the sleeping toddler in the back. Keanu wore a gray beanie, a patchy flannel shirt, and a short, scruffy beard. He looked more like a retired nature writer than one of the world's most recognizable actors. That was exactly the point. By nightfall, they reached a cedarwood cabin tucked into the slopes of British Columbia's southern interior. The house was secluded, solar-powered, and half buried by thick spruce trees. The air smelled like pine needles and wet earth. The silence was absolute. Evelyn walked the perimeter, checking the new security setup. Keanu walked the creaking wooden floors, memorizing the space the way a man does when he knows he's going to stay. Aria, wrapped tightly in her lavender blanket, slept soundly for the first time in days. No sirens, no reporters, no fear. In the days that followed, they settled into a strange, serene rhythm. Keanu chopped firewood every morning and fed the birds near the window. Aria learned to walk by stepping barefoot across pine cones and moss. She laughed whenever she fell, arms open like she trusted the ground itself. By the time she was 18 months old, she was talking in full sentences. Not baby talk. Real, complete thoughts that startled even Evelyn. And one afternoon, after Keanu had finished building her a swing from thick rope and a maple plank, Aria looked up at him with her bright, steady eyes and said, "I remember Mommy's voice. She said, 'You're my safe.'" Keanu froze. His hands were still gripping the rope. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Aria placed her hand gently over his heart. "You're my safe, Daddy. Mommy said you'd keep me." Keanu's eyes welled instantly. The tears came before he could even try to stop them. He dropped to his knees in the snow, pulled her into his chest, and cried. Long, deep sobs that shook through him like thunder rolling from years of buried storms. He hadn't cried in over a decade. Not at awards, not when his sister passed, not even when the world grew too heavy. But this child, this tiny voice that remembered her mother and saw through his quiet armor, undid him. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel broken by grief. He felt whole. The days grew longer, and so did their bond. Keanu began to keep a simple journal, something Evelyn encouraged. Not just for himself, but for Aria's future. He wrote in short sentences, most of them reflections she inspired. He jotted down her favorite words, her peculiar questions, her quiet moments. One entry read, She stares at the stars like she knows them. Another said, "Today she hummed Beethoven. We haven't played it in weeks." At night, the two of them would sit on the small porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the wind move through the treetops. Keanu would point to the constellations with her tiny hand curled in his. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper. But Aria had names of her own for them. "That's the listening one," she'd say, pointing at Vega. "And that one, the door." He didn't correct her. Evelyn stayed for another month before returning to the States under a different identity. She left behind extra encrypted drives, burner phones, and a map marked with 3 more safe houses, just in case. Before she left, she kissed Aria's head and said, "The world doesn't know it yet, little one, but you're its second chance." To Keanu, she left a final word of advice. Don't wait for the world to catch up. Aria will always be ahead. Meet her where she is, not where you wish she'd be. Spring arrived slowly that year, softening the snow into fields of wild grass. Aria grew stronger and more radiant by the day. She asked questions about everything, about bugs, about rivers, about why people sometimes lie. One morning she stood at the window and watched a hawk circle overhead. She turned to Keanu and asked, "Do hawks remember their babies after they fly away?" He didn't have an answer, but she was already moving on, twirling in the sunlight. The local villagers, mostly recluses and farmers who kept to themselves, had no idea who Keanu really was. They just called him Kaya, quiet man who came down from the mountain once a week for supplies, always with a child strapped gently to his chest or riding on his back. He always paid in cash, always smiled politely, never lingered. When one of the locals asked about the girl, Keanu simply replied, "She's my heart." It was the truth. By the time Aria turned 2, she was building little structures out of sticks and pine cones that resembled domes and towers. "It's for when we go up," she said, "to the sky places." Keanu asked, "What do you mean, sweet pea?" She paused, tapped her chin, and said, "When people stop fighting, we go." He didn't understand fully, not yet, but he was learning to listen. At night, she sometimes spoke in her sleep, phrases in different languages, math terms. Once she whispered, "Not yet, it's too early." Another time, "They're watching the wrong horizon." Keanu began sleeping with the baby monitor on even after she'd long since grown past needing it. Not because she needed it, but because he needed to hear every bit of what she might say. He hadn't worked on a film in nearly a year, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't miss it. His agent had long since stopped calling. His team thought he was healing from a personal tragedy, and perhaps he was, but not in the way they assumed. He wasn't vanishing. He was becoming. The world, fast and loud, full of chaos and illusion, had never felt further away. Yet, holding Aria's hand as they watched the moon rise, Keanu had never felt closer to something eternal. He didn't know what would come next, whether danger would rise again, whether the world would find them. But he knew this: he had been chosen for something bigger than legacy. He had been trusted with a soul that remembered her mother's voice, her dreams, and perhaps humanity's own forgotten future. And he would guard that future with everything he had. The morning sun poured gently through the old cedar trees surrounding Keanu's sanctuary in British Columbia. It was a quiet place, unlisted on any map, tucked deep within moss-covered hills. Birds moved lazily across the misty sky, and a river hummed in the distance. Today marked Aria's 2nd birthday. There would be no balloons, no guests, no cake with her name scrawled in frosting. Keanu hadn't bought presents or sent invitations. Instead, he had spent the early hours of the morning sitting by a single wooden table, recording a video that he had waited 2 years to speak from his heart. His laptop sat open in front of him, the camera steady. He wore a soft gray sweater, his beard longer now and eyes more weathered than the world remembered. Behind him, a fire crackled quietly in the stone hearth, and a single piece of folded paper rested nearby. Aria's first crayon drawing. He took a slow breath, and then, gently, he began. "I'm not speaking today as an actor, or a public figure, or someone with anything to promote," he said. "I'm speaking as a man who's learned that some of life's most important moments come when no one is looking." The camera held steady as he leaned in slightly, eyes deep and calm. "There's a child I know, whose dreams changed mine. I can't tell you her name, but I can tell you this. She reminded me that wonder is not something we're born with and lose. It's something we're born to protect." He paused for a moment. There was weight in his voice now, and softness too. "Somewhere right now, there's a child holding a question they don't yet know how to ask, a dream they can't explain, a light in them the world hasn't yet understood." Keanu closed his eyes briefly, searching for the right words. This message is for the parents, the teachers, the quiet protectors out there. You don't need to understand the science. You don't need to decode the mystery. You just need to be present, to listen, to hold space for the impossible things children sometimes carry. Because they're not carrying data, they're carrying futures. He let the words settle before continuing. "There's a phrase I heard once, guardians of wonder. And I believe that's what we're all meant to be. Not just for our children, but for the children who don't yet know they're seen. The ones who are different, or quiet, or brilliant in ways we don't yet have a name for." In the next room, Aria stirred lightly in her sleep, her little hands clutching the edge of her stuffed fox. She had no idea the world was about to feel her presence without ever hearing her name. Keanu's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "If you're watching this, I'm asking you not to look for answers in labs or headlines. Look in your own home, your classroom, your park bench. The child drawing circles on a napkin might be seeing something we've all forgotten to see." He looked straight into the camera one final time. If we want to build a future worth dreaming about, we have to start by listening to the dreams of those who haven't learned to doubt them yet. He reached forward and gently stopped the recording. The screen went black. The video, titled only "A Note on Wonder," was uploaded quietly that evening. By sunrise, it had begun to spread like wildfire. It began slowly, just a few shares on private parenting forums and small communities dedicated to child development. But within hours, something unexpected happened. Scientists, artists, school teachers, even therapists began reposting the video not for its production value or celebrity name, but because of its message. There was no branding, no press release, no promotional campaign, just Keanu's voice speaking about something many had forgotten how to name. By the second day, the video reached 1 million views. By the third, major networks were replaying the clip in full, calling it the speech the world didn't know it needed. People wept while watching it on their phones during lunch breaks. They showed it to their children before bed. They whispered the phrase, "Guardians of Wonder," like a vow. Journalists scrambled to find out who the mysterious child behind the message might be, but Keanu had left no clues. He never mentioned Aria. No photos were shown. And yet, the world felt her. In the silence between his words, in the way his voice trembled when he spoke of futures, shaped not by code, but by compassion. A teacher in Finland printed out the transcript and taped it across her classroom wall. A librarian in Montana built a new reading corner labeled "For the Dreamers." Thousands of parents posted stories of their own children who'd said things that didn't fit inside boxes. Children who drew spirals without knowing why, who spoke about stars with aching familiarity, who hummed old melodies no one had taught them. The video became a mirror, and in that mirror, people began to see not just their children differently, but themselves. In a studio loft in Tokyo, A 12-year-old boy wrote his first poem and read it aloud to his father for the first time. In Cape Town, a single mother left her third job and wrote a letter to her daughter promising, "From now on, I'll listen better." In New Mexico, an ex-military scientist paused while rewatching Keanu's video for the third time. Then, quietly, she unlocked a drawer she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a file marked Awakened Cohort, Phase 3. She stared at it for a long time, then burned it. Some futures, she realized, shouldn't be analyzed. They should be protected. And somewhere, in a quiet forest in British Columbia, Aria celebrated her second birthday. She wore no party hat. There was no candle to blow out. But there was music. Keanu strummed his guitar gently by the fire while she danced barefoot on the wooden floor, arms swaying like leaves in the wind. Her eyes sparkled not with knowledge, but with joy. Pure and simple joy. "Happy birthday, little soul," he whispered. Aria looked up and smiled. "Happy stars, Daddy." It didn't matter that the world didn't know her name. It didn't matter that she'd been born with something the world wasn't yet ready to understand. What mattered was that somewhere, something had shifted. And in millions of homes, hearts had cracked open to the idea that the future wasn't hiding in code or power, but in the small voice of a child asking to be heard. Because that's all Aria ever wanted, to be felt. And now she was. The cabin hadn't changed much in 5 years. The porch still creaked under Keanu's steps in the morning, and the old kettle on the stove still let out a soft whistle before sunrise. What had changed was the laughter echoing through the trees, the kind of joy only a child could bring. Aria was now 7 years old, her dark curls wild from the wind, her eyes still impossibly knowing. Keanu lived quietly, deliberately. He had stepped out of the spotlight long ago. The world had moved on from the headlines, but Aria's presence in his life had remained the center of his universe. She now ran through meadows, wrote stories by the fireplace, and played melodies on a small keyboard he had taught her to love. Each morning began with a walk down the wooded trail, Aria hopping between stones as Keanu carried a thermos of warm tea. She asked questions most adults wouldn't dare to wonder aloud. "Do you think people stop dreaming when they get older because they're afraid their dreams might be real?" Keanu smiled. "I think people forget how to believe. But you haven't." She tapped her notebook against her palm, eyes focused on the treetops. "Because I remember things from later. That's what I call them. Memories from later." Keanu paused. "Memories? From the future?" Aria nodded gently. "Not always clearly. But sometimes I'll see something happen and I just know I've already written it. Like that time Evelyn called before she actually did." She flipped to a page in her notebook. "It was here, look. I wrote it 2 days before it happened." He read the words in her careful handwriting. "Evelyn will call and say she found the others, but they're not ready yet. That means I have to be ready instead." Keanu looked down at her, the same feeling rising in his chest he'd felt the day he first held her. That unshakable sense that the universe had chosen this child for something it didn't quite understand yet, and chosen him to protect her long enough for her to become who she was meant to be. They returned to the cabin just as the wind picked up, scattering pine needles across the front step. Aria's stories were everywhere now, bound in little journals stacked by her window, tucked under her pillow, read aloud during stormy nights. Some were about distant planets and lonely astronauts. Others were about lost animals who found their way back home through songs no one else could hear. But many were different. One story, she titled, "When They Left Us Alone," was written in past tense, though it hadn't happened yet. It described a world where governments agreed silently not to intervene, where they watched from afar, knowing the public wouldn't tolerate any act of force against someone so beloved, so visible. Keanu read that story 3 times, because it had already come true. He hadn't heard from Evelyn in months, but when he had, her tone had changed. No more warnings, no more coded emails, just quiet assurance that things were stabilizing. "There's been a decision," she had said, "to step back. Everyone's eyes are on you two now. No one wants to be the villain in Aria's story." And somehow, Aria had known it before Evelyn did. It had started with her drawings, those spirals and symbols no one could explain. Then her humming, matching tones to satellite frequencies. Evelyn once said had been dormant since before Aria was born. But now, Aria's gift had evolved. She wasn't just seeing glimpses of the future. She was writing them. Her notebook had become a kind of map, not to predict events, but to offer emotional coordinates, guidance. The entries didn't say what to do, but how to feel when the moment arrived. On the cover of her newest journal, she had written in purple ink, "Stories are softer than weapons. That's why they reach further." Keanu taught her to write without fear, to express wonder without apology. He gave her the tools of his trade, not the cameras or scripts, but rhythm, quiet, and attention. They read Rilke and Baldwin together. She underlined phrases and whispered the ones that made her chest warm. He told her stories from his own life, of motorcycles in the desert, of silent grief, of losing people he loved without having had the words to say goodbye, and she listened like someone older than herself. She didn't flinch when he cried. "Sometimes," he told her one evening, "when I was your age, I used to pretend I could turn invisible. Where are they now? Because I felt like I already was." Aria nodded, thoughtful. "That's why I chose you." Keanu's breath caught. "You chose me?" "In the before," she said. "When I was with Mommy, she told me I could choose where I would go. I saw you, alone, but not broken. You had quiet hands. That's how I knew." Keanu closed his eyes and pressed her small hand to his chest. The wind outside shifted. The fire crackled. In her presence, time felt less linear and more like something you could cup in your hands and drink slowly. Even Evelyn admitted that something larger was at play. She called it epigenetic empathy, an awakening of emotional intelligence so advanced it shaped consciousness itself. She said, Aria might be the first proof that evolution wasn't about strength, but sensitivity. That winter, Aria wrote a short story called The Listening Tree. In it, a girl sits under a tree that doesn't speak, but remembers every story ever whispered into its bark. And when the world forgets how to feel, the girl returns to remind them, one by one, with stories shaped like light. Keanu posted that story, anonymously, on a quiet blog he hadn't touched in years. It spread like fire through snow. No hashtags, no headlines, just hearts recognizing something ancient and necessary. Soon, educators began using it in classrooms. Musicians composed songs inspired by it. One city planted a grove of trees and placed blank journals beneath them, so children could write what they wanted the trees to remember. No one knew the name of the author, but the world felt her. And the world, slowly, began to change its posture, not with laws or leaders, but with listening. The future Aria once feared had softened, not because danger no longer existed, but because love had grown louder than fear. And for Keanu, that was enough. Because the girl who once arrived on his doorstep in silence was now teaching the world how to hear again. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of a small public library nestled in a quiet Canadian village. The world outside buzzed with headlines and noise, but inside everything moved at the gentle pace of a turned page. Keanu sat on a circular rug among a cluster of children, his boots crossed at the ankles, a weathered copy of The Little Prince open in his hands. His voice was steady and kind, pausing just long enough to let the words settle into the children's minds. Beside him, Aria sat with a box of crayons and a folded piece of thick drawing paper, legs tucked under her in that relaxed posture only children seem to master. She was older now, almost 7, and though the world still knew nothing of her origins, something about her had rippled through it. The soul broadcast, as the public had come to call that anonymous video from years ago, had changed the way people spoke about innocence, wonder, and the futures we shape for our children. While Keanu read aloud, Aria's crayons moved with purpose. Her strokes were confident, fluid, and fast, as if she weren't imagining but remembering. As he reached the line, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly," Aria quietly passed her drawing to the nearest child beside her, who gasped. Drawn across the page was a long bridge of starlight, arcing from the earth to the stars. It wasn't just artistic, it was symbolic. From the swirling galaxies above to the small, luminous orbs holding hands on earth, every line pulsed with something more than color. And in the lower right corner, Aria had written 4 soft words in her curving script. "Love first, always." Keanu closed the book, set it down slowly, and glanced over. The moment their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. He reached for her drawing and placed it carefully inside the back of the book, like a secret gift for the next person who would open it. Then, pulling a pen from his coat pocket, he added a handwritten note on the inside back cover. "If someone you love is waiting to be chosen, choose them. The future depends on it." He didn't sign his name. The librarian, a gentle man with silver-rimmed glasses, didn't interrupt. He simply watched from a distance, quietly moved, as if he sensed this wasn't just another community reading hour. As Keanu gathered his coat, one of the younger children tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Was that story real?" Keanu knelt beside the boy, placed a hand gently on his shoulder, and said, "Sometimes the most real stories are the ones you feel in your heart before you understand them with your mind." The child nodded. Aria gave him her crayon. As they left the library, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors that felt like another kind of language. And in that stillness, a voice spoke. Not aloud, but across countless homes and hearts. "What would you do if tomorrow was left at your doorstep today?" The next day, the book with Aria's drawing was found by a mother named Helen, who had brought her son to the library after school. She wasn't looking for anything specific, just a quiet place to sit. She picked up the book randomly, flipped to the final page, and paused when she saw the crayon drawing folded neatly inside. Her breath caught. The bridge from Earth to the stars felt strangely personal, like something her son had once described in a dream, and the handwritten note below it struck something even deeper. She stared at the words, then at her son across the room, who was laughing with another child, totally unaware. "If someone you love is waiting to be chosen, choose them. The future depends on it." Helen folded the drawing back into the book, carefully, as if it were sacred. She didn't take the book home. She didn't have to. The message was already inside her, and in homes like hers across the globe, messages like these were beginning to appear in different forms. Quiet stories passed down, memories sparked by children's dreams, fragments of truth woven into bedtime tales. None of them mentioned Aria's name, but the world felt her. Some called it a shift in global consciousness. Others dismissed it as viral sentimentality. But those who'd seen Keanu's anonymous video years ago never forgot it. In it, he didn't preach or plead. He simply spoke from a wooden chair in front of a quiet fire. Voice calm, eyes soft, heart completely open. He said, "I once thought the future would be made of metal, of wires and code, of faster machines and endless screens. But now I believe the future begins in something quieter, something held in the eyes of a child who hasn't been taught fear yet." He looked down for a moment, then continued, "We've built rockets, towers, empires, but we haven't always built love. Not the kind that lasts, the kind that listens, the kind that chooses presence over progress." He folded his hands in his lap, then finished with this. There are children among us now who don't carry data. They carry dreams. And they need us to believe in them before we try to explain them, before we try to measure them, or market them, or model them. He looked into the camera and said the final line like a quiet promise. Be a guardian of wonder. The future isn't something we build, it's something we protect. That line had been quoted on murals, in classrooms, and even engraved on a new community center in Nairobi. It became a kind of anthem for parents, teachers, nurses, musicians, and artists alike, people who weren't waiting for permission to love better. As for Keanu, he never revealed he was the speaker in the video. He never responded to the questions that followed its release, but anyone who had watched it closely would have seen it in his eyes. This wasn't performance, it was legacy. And in that legacy, Aria grew up, safe to imagine, safe to remember, safe to write stories that she said were from later, filled with bridges between people, empathy that healed cities, and technology designed not to dominate, but to connect hearts. If you've been listening to this story and something stirred in you, a face, a moment, a child who looked at you like you were home, then maybe you've already met your tomorrow. So here's the question. Have you ever met someone who felt like your purpose? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe that love is our greatest technology, subscribe, because we've got more stories that will make your heart beat louder than any machine.